How many have we got now?
30.
Great. Really good. Well, welcome everyone. I can recognise some faces from previous sessions, so obviously you're enjoying them. The What If webinars came from a conversation that we had at VMIAC last year that was around thinking, if we stop talking about the problems, which we had done for quite a long time with the Royal Commission, and saying how bad things were, what if we flipped it around and told them what it would look like if it was working well? And so some of you were involved in conversations around that process, and we prepared what we call the declaration. And the declaration told the Royal Commission and the Minister that when the mental health system is working well and actually providing healing and not just holding us in places, what it would look like, who would be there, what sort of interventions there would be, what sort of therapies there would be, who would be the key workers. And so we thought we'd take that a little bit further and ask the questions, what if? And some of you have been involved in the first two, and this is the third, and there are 4 more planned. What if, this afternoon is, what if there were no more stigma? Last week was, what if all genders were treated the same? And so we're gradually working through some of the what ifs that came out of the consultations. And it's been very interesting, and we intend to use this to say more to the Royal Commission in the next few weeks. So that's where it came from. That's a little bit about where it might go. We will be recording it if you're all okay with that. Doesn't take names. It just means that we can replay Charlotte's part at a later time, and we can also use some of the conversation in the chat room without any identification to strengthen our case with the Royal Commission. Is there anything else we need to say, Emily, at the beginning?
Maybe an acknowledgement?
Yes, I was just going to do that. Yeah, thank you.
But apart from that, yeah, just if everyone could just stay on mute, that would be great.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, as Tricia said, we can just, if you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat and I can relay them to Charlotte.
Okay, so before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which we are today. We are in many places, and I would like to acknowledge in particular, because of where VMIAC is, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge that this land has never been ceded and it was taken from them violently. It will always remain the land of the First Nations peoples. I would also like to acknowledge that they kept this land safe and sacred for over 60,000 years, and that we have managed to destroy much of it in just 200. I would also like to acknowledge those people here who have a lived experience of mental distress and pay my respects to you. So let's move on and welcome Charlotte. And this is a delight for me because Charlotte has been a friend of mine for, I can't remember how many years, Charlotte, but we won't tell them anyway.
Yep.
We have shared many of our stories about different mental distress and the ways it has impacted on us in our lives. Charlotte has a lived experience and has been in and out of different therapeutic settings, and as well as that, she has been a major advocate for women in particular in mental health issues. She is on the Mental Health Tribunal, a member, and she has developed a number of very exciting and innovative approaches, and worked particularly with young people around some of those issues to do with their mental health. So she wrote a very modest introduction, so I'm just saying a bit more than she wrote because I actually know. She's worked in the mental health system and worked with people. She was the manager of the magistrates court, so she's managed to live a life where she has influence across a number of sectors, in spite of, or maybe even because of, her own challenges. And I am delighted, absolutely delighted, to introduce Charlotte to those of you who haven't met her yet, and let her talk with us about what if there was no stigma, and what if, I think you could add to that, people who were in some of those positions were able to talk about their experience so that we actually were able to change the attitudes of people in government, in business, and in the not-for-profit sector, where having a mental illness is seen as a stigma and maybe even a barrier to promotion. So Charlotte, thank you very much for coming, and it's over to you.
Thank you very much. Now, before I start, I just need to warn you that I live in a house with a very loud barking dog, and she may, if somebody comes to the door, she will go off. And there's not much I can do about it. Just open the door, say, see, it's just another dog walking down the street, and she'll be fine. I also have a cat who likes to insert himself into some of my Zoom meetings. I'll do my very best to keep him off the keyboard, but if you do see a large brown black-looking cat, that's Harry. And I apologise in advance if he chooses to show you his bum, but that's one of his characteristics. I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to try and come backwards and forwards from it a little bit because just looking at a presentation is a bit boring. But let's see how we go getting myself onto sharing a screen with you. Yes. There we go. There. I'm not doing very well with this.
Charlotte, there should be a green button at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, it's giving me lots of things to share with, but not the thing I want.
Oh, so if you just do the first one, it should just be that will just be your screen in general, and then you can go into your.
Okay.
It should.
Gotcha. Got it. Thank you very much, Emily, for getting me on the right page. And I have a slow computer, which is also not exactly the most exciting thing in the world. Let's go home. And I had this all sorted nicely. And of course, guaranteed, isn't it? There we go. So let's start from here. So Tricia has very kindly given you an introduction to me. There are a couple of other things that you should probably know just to get some idea about who I am. I'm a Pakeha, which means I'm a European. My family first came out to New Zealand in the 1840s, where we nicked a lot of land from Maori and started farming, and we're generally not very nice people. But, you know, that's the history of colonisation. I grew up in Western Australia on Noongar land, so in Perth, and I'm giving this presentation from the land of the Wurundjeri people in the Kulin Nation. So that's my kind of, in New Zealand tradition, you are supposed to tell your story about your land, your people, and your history before you come to who you are as a person. I'm nearly 60, and I'm sort of semi-retired at the moment, which is just kind of cool. I've also been the CEO of 3 organisations, and I've been in very senior management in federal government. I was the executive director of what is now the Federal Circuit Court. I was the CEO of a council in Western Australia. I was the CEO of the Magistrates Court of Victoria. I was the CEO of a disability group called DASI, and I most recently was the general manager of a division of Scope, which is a big disability organisation. So you'd look back on that and go, "Whoa, good career, right? Did well." Yeah, I'm also a tennis nut. I love my tennis. Martina Navratilova, Steffi Graf, you know, my favourites. I play violin, not particularly well, but I do play the violin in the community orchestra. I'm extremely happily married, and I've got lots of good friends, Tricia being one of them, and lots of kids in my life. That's me in a nutshell, right? Yeah, right. But this is also who I am. My first hospitalisation was when I was 17 and I was still in high school. I was suicidal and not in a good place. It was a very difficult situation. And so I was placed in the one of the two major public psychiatric wards of the major hospitals in Perth in Western Australia. Spent some time in there. My family has a long history of mental illness. I have cousins with schizophrenia. My brother has bipolar disorder, and depression is the family disease, just runs like wildfire throughout us. I've been sick enough that I've had to be in intensive care units at times and not allowed to, have freedom of movement. I have attempted to kill myself a couple of times pretty seriously, and of course I didn't know it at the time that self-harm was something that other people did, but yeah, I was in that place. So that's where I come from. And one of the impacts of that is that I'm now, I'm now on the mental health tribunal. So my lived experience has come round and I can now deliver something of some value. I try on that. Well, I can't talk about the tribunal too much here because everything there is confidential, as it should be. I see my role as to ensure that the voice of the patient is heard and to make sure that we've really tested, does this person require coercive treatment? Should this person have their rights restricted, especially if it's going to be hospitalisation or ECT? And is there another way? And is there other things that we should be considering? Particularly, I found for younger women where if they're behaving sexually, it's seen as a sign that they must be ill. And I'm sort of like, well, maybe that's a problematic view. But one of the things that I've noticed, both in myself, but also in the people that I talk to who are like you and me, who've got that lived experience, is this terrible, terrible sense of shame and stigma. And it's difficult to deal with, I think. When I think about that, well, what is the stigma that we experience? And at a personal level, it's all about that sense of disgrace, blame, a sense that we've done something really wrong. And I hear it when people in the tribunal, when people talk about being sentenced to, a 6-month order, or they've been hauled before the tribunal, or they say, I'm not a criminal, and so many times I've felt a need to say, you've done nothing wrong, you're not in trouble, you're not bad, please, you're not going to go to jail because you've got a mental illness. But the stigma goes beyond that. If you think about it, there's our personal sense, our own internalized stigma about having an illness and what it's done for us. And it depends a little bit. I think sometimes it's our memories about what happened when we were really ill, the things that we did and said, or sometimes there have been periods that I don't remember very well because I was too ill and I don't really remember what I did or said. I know that I was confused. I know that I did things, but I'm not very clear on them. So if someone tells me that I did X, I don't really know. And I feel often quite embarrassed that I have those confused periods in my memory. But when you think about stigma more broadly, stigma is also about the attitudes that others bring to this notion of illness. What other people think they know. I don't know how many times you've heard someone being called a psycho, and in that use of that phrase, which of course relates to psychosis or being psychotic, there's a sense of that person being really dangerous. And we see it in the TV shows on crime ones, CSI or Criminal Minds, and there's often, I get pretty angry sometimes, I yell at the television, when they talk about someone having schizophrenia or a dissociative personality and this, and it's like, no, that's not how it works. Then there's attitudes, the attitudes that others around us have. For instance, it's too hard to talk to someone who's got a mental illness, or it's too hard to think about it more broadly. There's our projected or perceived stigma, the stuff that we allocate to others. They won't want to talk to us because we've got this thing going on in here, and then there's a structural form of stigma, the stuff about how organisations design services or institutions deal with us when we're well and when we're not so well, or when we're becoming well or becoming unwell. And overwhelmingly, it's this sense that it's a weakness, and it's a personal weakness. It's a character flaw, and it's private. Don't talk about it. Many people will talk about the losses that have incurred when you're ill, as in who comes to visit you when you're in hospital, and who stays away, who reaches out. And then I've once had a boss come to see me when I was in hospital, and it was so deeply awkward because he had no idea what to do or what to say, and it was just, so we never talked about it again. So we know that the stigma is an issue. And if you look at, this is some research that Beyond Blue did in 2015, so it's a little bit old and maybe some things have changed. But if you look at the idea, strongly agree is in the red and agree is in the yellow colour. This is just about depression, not even psychosis or any of the other illnesses, just depression. That we're unpredictable, that it would be something you don't tell anybody about. That you wouldn't vote for a politician if you knew they'd suffered from depression. Even the word suffered from occasionally gets up my nose. You wouldn't employ someone, or that we're dangerous, or that we could snap out of it if we wanted to. I don't know how many times I've been told that I should just go for a walk. Why don't you try some exercise? Why don't you eat organic? Occasionally I want to have to do very rude things when people tell me that I should just, go for a walk. Anyone who's listening here who's had depression will know that sometimes getting out of bed is a major achievement. There have been times when it's been too hard to shower. That felt like I didn't have the energy in my tank to do that. Well, get out, come on, have a shower. You need to clean yourself up, put some clean. Hang on, you're asking someone with 2 broken legs to get up and run a marathon. Would you just back off? And of course, when we feel like that, we push everyone away. Anxiety is treated a little bit more kindly, although not a lot, but certainly a view about being unstable, that anxiety is not real. Again, you could snap out of it. It's a weakness, that you're self-centered, and, some things that are all those negative things. Where does this stigma come from? And I blame a few things. If you look at how mental illness, particularly anything involving psychosis, is dealt with, the representations that we see on television and in the media, in the film industry, are terrifying. Whether it be what happened in One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest, which has done enormous damage, I think, to people's understanding about what goes on inside a hospital ward, to the real torment that people have suffered in asylums, whether it be Bedlam in London, to the more recent asylums, which kept not only people with serious mental illness, but also people with intellectual and physical disabilities, as if everyone just needed to be warehoused. And even this notion, some of you might have seen that film, The Joker. I won't, because the notion of watching a person sort of do that kind of slow disintegration into illness is not something that I really need in my life. So what happens when we get these messages that we are violent and impulsive? Sometimes we should be pitied, that poor person over there, that we're unlikely to achieve very much in our lives, that we are very, very much unpredictable, or that we're just plain difficult, or that we're just being a drama queen. Well, what's happens here is that the stereotyping that arises out of all of these messages that we get, including our own internalized messaging, leads to a form of prejudice, which leads to discrimination. And the discrimination is very, very real. It's not in our minds. We're not making it up. One of the things that happens, I think, on a personal level, is that we delay seeking help. It takes a lot to get me, and I'm getting better at it, but I still struggle with it sometimes. It takes a lot for me to go and actually pick up the telephone and ring my psychiatrist and say, I need an appointment, I'm not traveling very well. Why? Because it feels like I've failed again. And the answer is no, I haven't failed again. I have an illness. It's called depression and anxiety. And occasionally it surfaces in ways sometimes unpredictable that I didn't recognise, and sometimes there are good reasons why I might have felt that way. But the delaying in seeking help means, of course, that by the time you become unwell, it takes a lot more effort to come back to feeling a bit better. And that sense of hopelessness. Again, delay, so you become sicker, and then you go, oh God, I'm in this place again, yet again, I will never get better. And people will say to you, but you know you've got well before, and that's all very well meaning, but at the time it's like, oh God, here I am again, yet again. So you will end up with avoidance behaviours and isolation. The discrimination we experience comes, I think, in three major areas: in employment, and in housing, and in healthcare. And the kind of thing that we tend to experience is these. Have you ever gone to hospital with something like a potentially broken leg? And the first thing they say is, look at it, is, oh, psych history. And the next thing you know, you've got someone from the psychiatric ward coming to have a little chat to you. No, I've actually broken my leg. Or going to see the GP and you're tired, really tired. You've got a level of fatigue, and it's assumed that you just need your medication adjusted for your depression. In fact, you're anemic, or you've got some other illness, physical illness, but seeing your mental illness first before you get anything else done. Being limited in what people see us being able to do. And then, of course, coercive treatment, which is an extremely upsetting process for anyone who's been through it. It's very hard, very, very hard, especially when there's been an element of force involved in bringing you into treatment. And then there's segregation. Now, I can't do it at the moment with the tribunal, but we're meant to go out to every hospital or clinic face-to-face before COVID-19. We go out and do that. Why is every psych unit miles away from everything else? Now, some people say that's to give us privacy. Why do we need privacy? Have we done something to be ashamed of? No. Because we might do something? I don't know. Why? In almost every hospital I've ever been to, there's like this long corridor, and it goes way down the back of the hospital before you find the psych unit. And I do genuinely wonder sometimes what that is, that message that's telling us. But it's also a form of segregation in community as well. And one of the things I think is least understood is the relationship between mental illness, alcohol and drug use. And in some cases, for people who've also got intellectual disabilities, you get another form of segregation yet again on top of that. Now, having said everything that's wrong, trying to flip it, well, we can do something about it. And I think we should do something about it. The first is personal. And that's about acknowledging our own feelings of shame or embarrassment, or the self-criticisms that we've heaped on our own heads for having been ill at one point or another, whether you've had one experience of being ill or you've had a lifetime's experience of being ill. I think we need to use our righteous anger about the way we're treated to motivate us to take appropriate actions. And then there's the power of collective effort to work on educating people whether it be teachers, healthcare professionals, bosses, I don't really care, but the general community about what mental illness actually is and what it isn't. And then to look at ensuring that the contacts that people have are credible. We've got good people who can work together to educate, to protest, particularly when we see stuff in the media about the way a person has been described. I think here in Melbourne, it's been very difficult. We've had recently, over the last couple of years, a couple of people do some things in public which have caused enormous harm. And then a lot of those people have been described as having a mental illness or some other thing going on. And that's not helped us in the sense of people then assuming that if you are unwell, then you're going to do something violent and unpredictable. So one of the big things that I'm interested in is the Global AntiStigma Alliance, which uses people like us to speak about our experience, uses contact face-to-face. So come and talk to me. Yes, I'm a person who's been really, really, really unwell. I'm not currently unwell, but I have been. Come and talk to me. Social marketing, to be really on top of our social media, our Facebook, Insta, Twitter, TikToks, whatever is happening. Those, I'm getting too old for TikTok. Using those really well. Cultural responsiveness, it's different in different cultures. One of the things that really does occasionally frustrate me on the tribunal is that I think we're too white. We don't have enough people from different cultures and races to actually ensure that when we have someone who's Chinese or someone who's come from the Horn of Africa, someone who's been through the trauma of being a refugee, I can't relate to that. I don't have that experience, but we should. We should understand that we are a social movement and it's the people who make this real. And the focus has to be multi-layered and it's episodic. It's at the individual and the community and social levels. Now, how would that be different? Both in us and in the world around us. Well, I like to think that it might be a little bit like this. First of all, it wouldn't be something that I was ashamed of telling anybody. And obviously I've got over that now. And I have done for quite a long time. It's been many, many years since I, worked out how to hide those gaps in my CV. In my most recent job, which I've just retired from, when I was asked to disclose whether I had any other conditions, I put my depression and anxiety down. Stuff them. Yes, I do. Doesn't mean I can't perform. And I did perform. I did exactly what was required in my job and I did a good job of it and I'm happy with that. I also accept that when I'm not well, I can't do 110% of my job. Sometimes 90% is about, that's going to be pretty good, and sometimes things might have to be different. So how can we make that different? What would it be like if it wasn't something where I had to ask for a favour or ask for someone to be nice to me or to be understanding of me? What would it be like if I could say, oh, look, that episodic illness that I have, it's come back. I need to come in late. Could I come in later in the day? Or can I work from home? Or I might need some time. Or I need to leave early. Or can I work in a different part of the building because I'm feeling very, I need some space around me and I'm feeling a bit twitchy about noise and too much activity around me. If when I went into, I've got a good doctor, but I've had plenty of issues when I've gone in to see some doctors and the first thing they do is look at my psych history and say, oh, so, have you ever thought about changing your medication? My medication isn't me. That's just a medication I take along with the medication I take from my defunct thyroid. Big deal. Imagine going into your doctor's surgery and saying, I feel tired. And the first thing they do is say, right, so tell me how long have you been feeling tired? Ask me, and if you're a woman, they might ask about how your menstrual stuff is going. They might want to check your iron levels. They might want to check your thyroid levels. The last thing perhaps they would come to is, do you think it might be your depression or your anxiety? How do you think it might be if you do have an illness which involves a degree of mania or psychosis, and you know your early warning signs, and you're able to say, to someone, I think I'm becoming unwell. And instead of running away shrieking because it's terrifying, they actually went, right, okay, so what do you need from me? How can I help? Well, they knew what you know best is to help you with. What if going into things like insurance, you weren't like me when the first time I filled out my insurance and it said, have you got a history of depression? And I went, oh, do I fill this in? Because if I do, maybe I'm not going to get travel insurance. And if I can't get travel insurance, I won't be able to travel. Well, I did. And then what if we didn't have that kind of discrimination? What if that meant that there was less coercive treatment? What if that meant that our police were better able to manage someone who's distressed? What if that meant then that instead of being pepper sprayed or tasered or shot, people were actually supported, helped to self-soothe, to calm, to be okay? What if that led us then to having much more variety in the kinds of treatment options than we have? I saw someone a couple of weeks ago and I just looked at this person and thought, really, what you need is a lot of space. You need not to have a lot of people around you. So that you've got time just to come down. How would it be if it was assumed that you had capacity as a parent? So, for instance, in family law, it wasn't brought up, this person's, they can't have the children because they've got a mental illness. What if that supposition was completely swept away? So it was your quality of your parenting, not your mental illness, that's an issue. I'm sure you can think of other things, and I invite you now perhaps to talk to me about what you think would be different if we didn't carry shame and the rest of the world didn't see us as someone who's done something wrong, as someone who's done something bad, if we were people to blame. In fact, as they should, in my view, that those of us who've gone on to build, and we all have, built lives despite, and sometimes because of, the experiences that we've had, whether it was me as a 17-year-old, for me it's been advocacy for young people to make sure that they don't go into the adult system because it's the wrong place for teenagers. And also coming from Western Australia to advocate for services going into rural and remote parts of Australia. And now with my experience in disability, my passion is for people who have a mental illness and also have an intellectual or other disability, and having that better seen, heard, understood and dealt with. So now I'm really happy to open up the conversation, you could talk to yourselves, talk to me, however you'd like to take it. So it is now over to you.
If anyone's got any questions or anything, you want to pop them in the chat.
Yeah, feeling helpless and hopeless are very sensible responses to stigma. They're entirely predictable. Why wouldn't you, someone's just put that up there, why wouldn't you go, well, why should I try? Or why should I feel any different if I'm only ever going to be seen as deficient, weak, less than? And that's a really hard thing to have.
I think we've got a lot of stigma still in our institutions, which make it really difficult. I know at university, I got very unwell and was delusional, and I understand why they wanted me to stop studying because I wasn't able to concentrate and I was also disruptive, but they didn't handle it very well, and that was handled so badly that now I feel really awkward about even going back on campus and also like calling them and sort of working out how I can return to study again and things like that. So it's sort of like in some ways they forget that we do go back to normal. Like, so, and when we go back to normal, we still remember how we got treated.
Yeah, you felt like you were punished for having an episode of your illness. I know, and someone, Tony's thing said, can we use another word than illness? I'd love another word. I really would love another word. And yes, if there was no stigma, it'd be like, oh, you've come back from breaking your leg, or from having cancer, or something less life-threatening perhaps, or you needed to go off for some treatment for, I don't know, a skin condition. Wouldn't it be amazing if it was like, oh, great, you're back. Right, now, do you want to take a full load on, or do you think a part load on? What would be easier now? Do you need a quiet space to study in? Whatever it is that's going to work for you, instead of, oh, yeah, it's you. Run away.
Yeah, it's so hard. It's really difficult. And I think that
yeah.
I think also it's just, being treated badly when you're unwell, even and I can understand why, because by normal standards I wasn't behaving normally, but it's just that awkwardness that comes when I remember it, and I just kind of feel like, oh, I don't belong there anymore, or something.
Yeah. Look, it's not when you see people being brought in by police, for instance, into hospital, that is a trauma, absolute trauma. And I think, while sometimes I do think that's necessary, sometimes, police should be better equipped so that the least use of any kind of restraint for a start, well-trained and restrained, well-trained, and it's better than they are, and a sense that rather than being brought in like a prisoner, like a criminal, there has to be a better way of making that, from someone very unwell coming into a treatment facility of some sort, without it feeling like you've done something criminal. And that certainly would be much better. And it is hard, isn't it, afterwards, to think, oh God, I did that, or that happened, or somebody had.
And you can't do anything about it afterwards, so it's just there, like it's
and that's
awful.
And that's why I talk about I think beginning with stigma, a lot of it begins with us. We have to come to terms with that first, about our own sense of shame. And the answer is, I didn't invite this illness into my life. I didn't make it happen. I carry a family predisposition, and some of the life events have made it likely that, have made it happen. I do as much as I can when I'm well. Trisha.
Just want Emily to unmute me. Thank you. Thanks, Zoe. Tony, I wasn't sure if you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I do. I think a lot of mental conditions are just the fact that people are behaving in a way that other people don't like, and a lot of them can be fixed without medication. So why is everything so focused on curing the illness, whereas in fact in a lot of cases, particularly when you say a lot from a numerical point of view, and I understand that there are some real pathological cases, why do we have to talk about it as an illness? And I think it probably goes back to the fact that it's considered part of the medical fraternity. And I think just on one of your points early, Charlotte, about the physical location of the mental health wards, or what else, it's simply the fact that I think psychiatrists are considered a different part of the medical establishment, and people are uncomfortable if so-called psychological patients are near the rest of are near the normal people.
It's infectious. Look, there's some good questions there. There are some people I've seen who have been extremely ill and distressed. Can I put that in there? Really distressed with what's been going on inside them. And no matter how much medication you throw at them, no matter how many times they have ECT, they remain very, very, very distressed. What is the right way to provide support, a life to those people? Not just locking that person away because they're perceived to be dangerous, because that's the perception, that's the stigma. Prejudice and discrimination. Someone's raised those words. I'm kind of tracking some things there. So there's that end.
Yep.
And then there's also this notion that somebody who is very elevated is unwell. And I'm working with someone, a friend from my previous workplace, and she and I have got a good arrangement because she confided some stuff in with me, and said, "You taking your meds?" She went, "No." Went, and I said, "So what's happening? Are you going this way? Or are you going that way?" She said, "Oh, I think I'm going this way." And I said, "So what happens when you get past here? What happens?" She described it. And we went, "So what do you think we should do?" And she said, "I need to take my meds." I went, "Okay, let's go and get that stuff organised." But what she really needed, and I can't do this all the time, is that personal contact. And for it to be okay for her to be able to say in the workplace, sometimes I get a bit up, sometimes I get a bit down, and I need help, and I find it difficult to get myself organised to take my meds regularly. And it's just part of her. And that's nothing wrong with that. It's not pathologised. It's not.
And often that person just needs to be left alone for a little while, or have a place to go away just for some time to let the high come down, or the low to come back up again.
Well, there's some people where, seriously, we've had some good discussions around, we've said, look, this person's very odd. Things they do are pretty odd in terms of what the community context is.
Yep.
Is it madness?
Well, exactly.
Is it psychiatric illness? Is it actually causing any harm to anybody? And if it's not causing harm, leave them alone.
Yeah. And if it's not causing harm, in a lot of cases, it's the stigma and the person's failure to meet other people's expectations that are making the situation worse.
Look, I found it was my own expectations that I wasn't meeting that was actually in some ways the hardest.
Well, that's another. Let's
get the thing out and flog myself because I'm not doing, whatever I thought I should be doing. And I've had to accept somewhat reluctantly that there are certain things that are not good for me. I can do them and I can do them well, but I pay such a high price for them that it's not sustainable and not sensible, and got to not do it. But as I said before, I think we're coming up to time when Emily and Tricia will tell me you need to close. But as I said, dealing with the stigma, I think we have to start with our own, and then use that to talk about it to other people, and then work where we want to. Not if you don't want to. There's no obligation. But with organisations like VMIAC, like Mind, like Beyond Blue, I wish there was a Beyond Blue for schizophrenia. The number of times I've heard people say, I don't have schizophrenia, and I'm at the tribunal and I say, it doesn't matter what you call it, the label is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that label, because that label comes with so much power. And it's so painful for people to get that label of, the schizophrenic, especially if someone labels you the paranoid schizophrenic or the treatment-resistant paranoid schizophrenic. Not friendly at all. So if we could start with that deal with our own shame, start to recognise the wins, the strength that we've had to develop in order to get well. That's a position of great power. And from that, be assertive about what we need in the settings that we visit. And I think from there we can really make some good changes. And I'm pleased to see more and more people in public office talking about it. I wish they would do it at the time, not in their books afterwards, Malcolm. But it should be okay. It was great to see the police commissioner say, I need to take some time out. You know, I'm emotionally burned out and I can't. That's fantastic. But do you think he could do it more than once? Or would it be seen as a problem if he had to do it, say, every 18 months, he had to take some extra time out to cope with the load? I think that currently that would be seen as a problem, not strong enough. So that's where we need to change things. Sorry, Tricia.
That's okay, Charlotte. I cut across. I just want to check if there's anybody else, just very quickly, we've got a couple of minutes. Anyone else who would like to comment or ask a question?
Yes, please, if that's okay. My name's Damon.
Yep, Damon.
My lived experience, being admitted to hospital and going through the process, the medication, it was taking on the situation at the time where I had an accident. I went to the hospital to be treated, and automatically the contact from the hospital to my wife, where we were going through an emotional situation with the kids, that was enough to get me put in hospital 3 times in the Maroondah Hospital. My feelings of the whole process is the lack of knowledge, the lack of individual one-on-one people. And I put the suicide barriers up in the Westgate Bridge, and I seen kids throw themselves from it. The kids needed help. The system needs to get better. I was listening through the Royal Commission, and my sister had to fly over here 3 times from Scotland because she is involved in this department back there. There is a barrier between what systems are here and what systems are in, say, Scotland, and they've just developed a new mental health strategies. I think we can learn from that, but definitely taking a mental health chart against a person who's come in with an injury and automatically defining them as having mental health related problems. And they've done that to me. And I've got no visitors. I got left alone. I got 4 kids. Everybody just, I had a disease. I'm very proud of depression and what I went through because I was exposed to workplace bullying. And it creeps up. Suicide. I have been in that part. But I'm stronger now and I'm a lot better. I'm working towards a non-medicated therapeutic way of reducing these medication, the pills, the antipsychotics. It is a journey, but we can educate organisations, because when I raised my issue, it was discussed in that organisation that Damon, depression, loser, and once you start to hear people talking about you with their lack of knowledge, you're stigmatised straight away. And that left me in a position where, as much as I wanted to go back to work in reduced hours and have them breaks, it was very, very uncomfortable to walk in when people were looking at you because other people had never had the knowledge to say, how are you? You feeling all right? Do you need time out? So we can better this this whole process of mental health. Stick to mental health. The criteria, I come from Scotland, I speak rapid. I had an injury, elevated speech. They never treated my injury. They just treated the way I presented myself and put me in a stretcher and put me in Maroondah Hospital. And for that, I believe my next stage in life is to be an advocate, that we do get more involved in individuals with problems, but treat them as people, not just a checklist.
Thank you, David. That very, very powerful. And thank you for your comments and your commitment. Charlotte, I'm interested. I remember in the early days of the women's movement and of the lesbian movement, people talking about internalized homophobia,
Mm.
that we and the many in the community internalize homophobia because we're scared of having it ourselves.
Yep.
And those of us that are gay or lesbian internalize the society's homophobia and beat ourselves up because it's not quite okay. And I've been thinking recently about, I don't know what you would call it, but mental distress phobia, that the society internalizes this because they're scared they might catch it or have it. And we who have had experiences of mental distress internalize that we're not okay. And so we carry that internalized phobia with us. I've been thinking about that recently.
I think culturally, especially in a country like Australia, then we have an expectation that so-called negative emotions, and I find that word problematic, are something which are not to be expressed too much. You shouldn't show them. And it's a difference between going to, as I did, to my uncle's Maori funeral, which is called a tangi, and then to the church funeral afterwards. Now, in the tangi, we were allowed to cry, weep, all that sort of stuff. But at the funeral in the church, very contained. And when we are distressed mentally, there can be anger, crying, fear, all those things. And culturally, we're not allowed to, if we weren't, well, you're not allowed to express it. So there's that kind of, you're breaking the cultural norms here. And we're all creatures of our own culture. And those things run so deep. It's a bit like, I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting, especially for the women here, and you're angry and you can feel yourself tears coming to your eyes because you're so angry, and you feel yourself going, don't cry, because then you'll be seen as, weak woman. I think it's the same thing with our mental distress. We do the same, don't show it if you can possibly help it, because those emotions are not permitted in a work environment or in a social environment. You can cry in your bathroom or cry in the shower, but you can't do it at work. Mustn't do it at work.
Thank you. We are going to have to wind up. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Let's say thank you. We will have another session next week. I'm not quite sure who it is, but it'll work out. And you'll find it on the website. If something has triggered something for you today, please ring the office and talk with us, and potentially join our discussion groups on Facebook, and think about what you need to do to look after yourself.
Yeah, please take care of yourselves, everybody. Be gentle with yourselves, especially if I've pushed a few buttons, okay? It's allowed. Okay.
And Emily, would you like to sum up any announcements that you want to make?
Yeah, just I know there's been quite a few questions on the chat, so I will take all of those down and send them through to Charlotte, and then when she gets a chance and responds, I will email them around to everybody. So don't worry, we will get your questions answered. But thank you so much, Charlotte. That was incredible, and as you can see on the chat, everyone extremely grateful.
It's okay. Look after yourselves, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next week.